Chapter 6. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on till the sun began to sink westward, behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward, and could see before him only ridges and slopes, falling toward the lowlands, and plains glistened occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I seem to have gone right to the other side of the misty mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where, oh, where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I have only hope to goodness they are not still back in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on, out of the little high valley, over its edge and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought or not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into that horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it, when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a very stony path, winding downward with a rocky wall in his left hand, and on the other side the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of these dells under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw peering between two big boulders a head with a red hood on. It was Balin's doing. Look out. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he had saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. "I will give them all a surprise," he thought, as he crawled into the bushes into the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on their journey with leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find him out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him." The dwarfs wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick up to his friends and come along with them, why the wizard would have chosen someone with more sense. "He's got to be more trouble than he's worth to us so far," said one. If we've got to go get back now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say." Gandalf answered angrily, "I brought him, and I do not bring things that are of no use. Either you help for me look for him, or I go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only ever find him again, you will thank me before it's over. What did you want to go down and drop him for, Dory?" "You would have dropped him," said Dory, "if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you up in the back." "Then why didn't you pick him up again?" "Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everyone falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glumding, and thorns stabbing you there and everywhere with Orchest. All of a sudden, you gave us one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everyone,' and everyone ought to have followed. We thought everyone had. There was no time to count, as you quite know well, till we dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and the helter-skelter down here. But here we are, without the burglar. Confiscate him." "And here's the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them, slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped. Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin and told him what he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them without warning. In fact, that Bilbo's reputation went up quite a great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had doubted that he really was a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing about the ring, and when they asked how he did it, he said, "Oh, just crept along, very quietly and carefully." "Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose, and not been spotted," said Balin, "and I take my hood off to you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about finding the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition, and shuddered most apprehensively at his description of Gollum. And then I couldn't think of any other question with him sitting beside me, ended Bilbo, so I said, "What's in my pocket?" And he couldn't guess it in 3 guesses. So I said, "What about your promise? Show me the way out." But he came at me to kill me, and I ran, and fell over, and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him, because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, and he was making for it. And then he sat down at the entrance, and I could not get by. So I jumped over him and escaped, and ran down to the gate. "What about the guards?" they asked. Weren't there any?" "Oh, yes, lots of them. But I dodged them. I stuck him in the door, which was only open a crack, and I lost a lot of buttons," he said, sadly looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed right through, and here I am." The dwarves looked at him with quite a new respect, and when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you could guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed that part of his tale had been left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained it now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they were all going to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness once more, so now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the evil goblins in that part of the mountains. But their main gate used to come out a different pass, one more easily to travel by, so they often caught people benighted near their gates. Eventually people had given up along going that way, and goblins must have opened a new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken, quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up until now. "I must see if we can't get more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all." As soon as Gandalf heard Bilbo's yell and realized what had happened, in a flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him as he nipped inside the crack, and just as it snapped to, he followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up his best magic he could in the shadows. A very tricky business it was. Touch and go. But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the fire magic fireworks at old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anyone who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction. "They made that gate ages ago," he said, "partly for a way of escape, if they needed one, partly as a way to the lands beyond, where they still come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They guard it doubly after this," he laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin, and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped, so they might have had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. "We must be getting on at once, now that we are a little rested," he said. "They will be out in the hundreds when night comes on, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must keep miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon, if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they much mind moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by." "Oh, yes," he said, in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. "We lose track of time inside the Goblins' tunnels. Today's Thursday. It was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles, and come right down through the heart of the mountains, and are now on the other side. Quite a shortcut. But we are not at the point where our path would have brought us. We are too far to the north, and have come some awkward country ahead, and we're still pretty high up. Let's get going." "I am dreadfully hungry," groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit! His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly, now that his excitement was over. "Can't help it," said Gandalf, "unless you'd like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage." No, thank you," said Bilbo. "Very well, then we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves." As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flowers, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled at a bit of sorrel, and drank from a small mountain stream that crossed their path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found in his bank, but it was not much good. They went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rockwood roses all vanished, and they found themselves on the top of a wide steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet, and soon bits of split stone were chattering down and shuddering pieces below them, slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rocks were disturbed and bounded off, and crashed down with the dust and noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, all together, in a fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking, slabs, and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that have stood here right at the mountain slope, from the deeper, darker forest to the valley below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves in lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter them from the onslaught of rocks. Soon the danger was over, and the slope of onslaught, the slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could only be heard as the largest disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. "Well, that has got us on a bit," said Gandalf. "And even the goblin tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly." "I dare say," grumbled Dunbar, "but I won't find it difficult to send those stones bouncing off our heads." The dwarves, and Bilbo, were feeling far from happy, and they were rubbing their bruises and damaged legs and feet. "Nonsense. We are going to turn aside here out of the path and slide. We must be quick. Look at the light." The sun had long gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them, though far away through the trees and over black tops of those growing lower down, they could still see evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able, down the gentle slopes of the pine forest in a slanting path leading steadily southward. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken, with tall fronds rising right about the Hobbit's head. At times they were marching along quiet over a floor of pine needles. All the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighting to the branches of the trees. "Must we go any further?" asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that he could only see Thorin's beard wagging beside him, and so quiet that he could only hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. "My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack." "A bit farther," said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place. There was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden, they heard a howl down the hill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another, right away to the right, and a good deal nearer to them. Then another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him often through tales. One of his elder cousins, on the Took side, who was a great storyteller, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and you do not need to see you to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he cried, and became a proverb, as we for now say, out of the frying pan into the fire, in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. "Up the trees, quick!" cried Gandalf, and they ran to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low, or slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as they ever could, and you can guess, and up they went as high as they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarves sitting up in the trees with their beards dangling down, like old gentlemen gone cracked with playing at being boys. Fili and Kili were at the top of a tall lark, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Glowin were more comfortable in a huge pine with regular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Bifur, Bofer, Bombar, and Thorin were in another. Dwalin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir with a few branches. Were trying to find a place to sit. In the greenery of the topmost boughs. Gandalf was a good deal taller than the others, and found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the very edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he piped out. And Bilbo? He could not get into any tree, and was scuttling from trunk to trunk like a rabbit that had lost its hole, and a dog was after it. "You left that burglar behind," said Nori to Dori, looking down. I can't be always carrying burglars on my back," said Dori. "Down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am? A porter?" "He'll be eaten if we don't do something," said Thorin, for there were howls all round them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dori," he called, for Dori was lowest down in the easiest tree. "Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up." Dori was a really decent fellow, in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not even reach his hand when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm as far as he ever could. So Dory actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself, only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he snug up and nearly got him. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them yelping all around the tree and leaping up at its trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves of the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time, they were safe. Luckily, it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at any time, but in the cold and wind, with wolves all around waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. The glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place of the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dory and Bilbo were. Then they went snuffing about till they had smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. These were guarded too, while the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seems, went and sat in a great circle in the glade. In the middle of the circle was a great grey wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, as if all the talk was about cruel and wicked things, as it was. Every now and then, all the wargs in the circle would answer their grey chief all together, and their dreadful clamour almost made the Hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I'll tell you what Gandalf heard, though Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains, unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes or are marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on raids, especially for food or slaves to work for them. They often got the wargs to help and shared plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do horses. Now it seems that great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live among the more pleasant woods in the valley and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dared not attack them if they were many together or in a bright day. But now they had planned with the goblins' help to come by night upon some of the villages near the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there next day. All would have been killed except the few goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not because of the brave woodmen and their wives and children, but because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and their friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their merry meeting place. They had thought them friends of the woodmen and were come to spy on them, and they would take the news of their plan into the valley, and then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle, instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly from their sleep. Soon the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up in the tree escape, at any rate, not until morning. And long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains, and goblins can climb trees, or cut them down. Now you understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel they were all in a very bad place, and had not escaped yet. All the same, He was not going to let them have it all their own way, though he could not do very much stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around and gathering below. He had gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree. Then he set one alight with bright blue fire and threw it whizzing down among the circle of wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. Then they burst on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in colored sparks and smokes. A specially large one hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leaped in the air 10 feet, and then rushed round and round in the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made for them filled all the forest. Wolves were afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most unusual and horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got in their coats, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glades, wolves were running over and over to put out the sparks in their backs, while those were running about, however, howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. "What's all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on top of a lonely pinnacle of rock on the eastern side of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks on either side leaped up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down upon the ring of wargs, a tiny spot far below. But the eagles have eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking, and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves, and he see tiny flashes of fire, and he could hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see the glint of the moon on goblin spears and helmets, as long as the lines of wicked folk crept down from the hillsides from their gate in the woods. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins, or fear them, when they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, as they did not eat such creatures. They swooped down on them and drove them shrieking back into their caves, and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of the Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot. So he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains. Slowly circling ever round and round they came down, down, down toward the ring of wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. A very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves had caught fire and fled into the forest, had set it alight several places. It was high summer, and on the eastern side of the mountains there has been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, fallen branches, heap-piled pine needles, here and there dead trees, were soon in flames. All around the clearing of wargs the fire was leaping. But the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were lapping up and howling around the trunks and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out and their eyes shining red and as fierce as the flames. Then suddenly, goblins came running up, yelling. They thought a battle with the woodsmen was going on, but soon they learned what really happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and soon they had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood from around the tree trunks. Others rushed round and stamped down beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke all around the dwarves, a ring which kept them from spreading outward, but closed it slowly in, till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes, and he could feel the heat of the flames. Through the reek he could see the goblins dancing round and round in a circle, like people round a midsummer's bonfire. Outside the ring of dancing warriors of spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectful distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds and 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with such funny little things? Roast them alive or stew in a pot. Fry them, boil them, and eat 'em hot. Then they stopped and shouted out, "Fly away, little birds. Fly away if you can. Come down, little birds, or you'll get roasted in your nests. Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing?" "Go away, little birds," shouted Gandalf in answer. "It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry, and to show them he was not frightened of them, though of course he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and went on singing. "Burn, burn, tree and fern, shriek, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch, to light the night for our delight, yah-hey! Bake and toast 'em, fry 'em, roast 'em, until beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black, and cinders lie beneath the sky, so dwarves shall die, and light the night for our delight, yah-hey! Yahari hey yahoy." And with that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment they spread to the others, the bark caught fire and the lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of the tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning, as he ready to spring down on his high right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he would have probably killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt. But he never leaped. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swooped down from above, seizing him in his talons, and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth, and the goblins yelled and stamped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to floor or drive them far away. Their talons tore at goblins' faces. Other birds flew up to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up and as far as they could ever dare to go. Poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind again. He had just managed to catch a hold of Dory's legs, as Dory was borne off the last of all, and up they went together in the tumult and the burning, and Bilbo sweeping in the air, with his arms nearly breaking. Now far below, the goblins and wolves were scattering far and wide in the woods. A few eagles were still circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames among the trees sprang up suddenly above the highest branches. They went up in a crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped only just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising the time in strong, sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot the flight. Clinging onto Dory's ankles, he moaned, "My arms, my arms!" But Dory groaned, "My poor legs, my poor legs!" At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of a quiet little cliff, and never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now, as he looked down the dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with peaks of light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rocks sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if it could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles and with a gasp and fell into a rough platform of an eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise about having been saved from the fire, fear lest he fall off the narrow place with the deep shadow on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by the time after his dreadful adventure in the last 3 days, with nothing to eat, and he found himself saying aloud, "Now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and placed back on a shelf." "No, you don't," he heard Dory answering, "because the bacon knows he will get back in the pan sooner or later. And it is hoped that we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks." "Oh, no, not a bit like forks, I mean," said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit, and are up in his eyrie at night. The eagle only sharpened his beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers and took no notice. Soon another eagle flew up. "The Lord of the Eagles bids you bring the prisoners to the great shelf," he cried, and was off again. The other seized Dory in his claws and fell away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just the strength to wonder what the messenger meant by prisoners, and he began to think of being torn for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came back. The eagle came back, seized him in his talons by the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time he only flew a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock in the mountainside. There was no path down to it save by flying, and no path down off except by jumping over a precipice. Then he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles was also there, and was speaking to Gandalf. It seems Bilbo was not going to get eaten after all. The wizard and the eagle lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, not the captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really, truly from these dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans of the great eagle for carrying the dwarves himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men live. They would shoot us with their great bows of yew, he said. for they would think that we were after their sheep. In other times, they might be right. No, we are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and will gladly repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the southward plains." "Very well," said Gandalf. "Take us as far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime we are famished with hunger." "I am nearly dead of it," said Bilbo in a weak little voice no one heard. "That can perhaps be mended," said the Lord of the Ingles. Later on you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rock, and the figures of the dwarves round it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and a small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Owen and Glóin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches even yet. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he could have slept contentedly, though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the rock more soundly than he ever done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house, and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like.